Welcome to Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape podcast, hosted by Dr. Erin Phillips, Director of Cross-Cutting Programs and Acting Senior Director of Research at the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources. The show highlights SCR's role in supporting our mission to promote energy-driven economic development in the state of Wyoming.
Greetings, listeners, and welcome to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape. Today, we're joined by Dr. Simon Pimblott, a laboratory fellow at Idaho National Laboratory and Chief Scientific Officer for the Nuclear Science and Technology Directorate. Dr. Pimblott has over 40 years of experience in the field of nuclear energy sciences, working closely with the U.S. Department of Energy and the UK Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. Welcome, Simon. We're really pleased to have you here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you.
All right. Well, I'm curious, is this your first visit to Wyoming, or have you been here before?
It's my first purposeful visit to Wyoming, shall we say. My children live on the east coast, Nashville, Cleveland. I guess it's not the coast, the eastern part of the country. So I've made a lot of trips along I-80, and I've got stuck here a few times at Thanksgiving and Christmas due to the weather. But really unbelievable countrysides. Yeah, it's a good place to be, and I've been looking forward to this visit.
Well, welcome. So let's get into your background and your technical expertise here. I mentioned that you have an extensive resume in the nuclear sector, spanning both the U.S. and the UK. Let's kick things off by giving you a chance to expound on your education and career path a bit. Can you tell our listeners more about your background and experience and how you've come to be at your current role at Idaho National Laboratory?
I'm afraid it's a little bit of an unusual path. I was educated at the University of Oxford in the UK. Undergraduate degree was chemistry, PhD is applied mathematics. I then came to America to see the places that I'd read about. My father got me reading cowboy books when I was, Louis L'Amour sort of things, when I was a small child, and wanted to see what I'd read about. Came here, was married within 6 months, and that's the beginning of the, shall we say, my travels in nuclear. So I spent nearly 20 years at the University of Notre Dame on the faculty. I then got headhunted back to the UK, where I was a chair professor at the University of Manchester, where I helped establish the Dalton Nuclear Institute, in particular built the Dalton Cambrian facility, which was the experimental arm of the institute, outside the fence at Sellafield, which is kind of like Idaho National Lab, the Hanford Reservation, and the Savannah River site, all rolled into one in the space of about 10 square miles. And, had lots of fun there doing essentially decommissioning, robotics, radiation effects on materials work. Then I came back to the US. We were always intending to do that. Our children were here. We left with one grandchild, came back to 5, but I got an offer I couldn't refuse at Idaho National Lab. And so that's how I ended up here. But in essence, I've been a nuke, as we call ourselves, man and boy. I mentioned I was Oxford educated, but I was actually paid to go to university by the UK's nationalised energy organisation, the Central Electricity Generating Board. So whilst I was there, I had to work for my keep, so to speak. I had to work for a year before going. I had to work in the summers, so I'd been on nuclear plant, coal-fired plant, in their research labs. So good grounding.
Great. Well, you mentioned the University of Manchester's Dalton Cambrian facility. What parallels do you see between the nuclear communities in the UK and those energy-centric communities here in the Mountain West?
It's really quite an interesting analogy, because Cumbria, which was where the Dalton Cambrian facility was set up, was very similar to Wyoming, to Idaho, to Montana, to Colorado. It's a very, very rural, very picturesque, fantastic, places to hike, to do outdoor stuff, to have a good time. But it's also the sort of place where nuclear is set up. Part of that is because it's remote. I really enjoyed living in Cumbria, just like I enjoy living in Idaho, and I enjoy spending time in Wyoming, Montana, etc. But the other thing that's nice is the fact that there is this openness to, at least at the moment, to nuclear in these communities, which is helping to revitalize the industry. And I think part of this is the fact that there's a desire for economic and technical growth in these areas that you're not seeing elsewhere. Cumbria, historically, has been tourism, and we used to call it jam makers. So people that, cottage industries and rural. And now it's changing. And I think that the same is true here. The opportunities in the energy field in the Mountain West are just unbelievable. Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Utah, the things that are potentially available to our communities are unbelievable.
Yeah, lots of interesting parallels there. So, Simon, among your many accolades, you were recognized as the Michael Fry Radiation Research Awardee for your work in radiation chemistry. For our listeners who aren't nuclear scientists, why is understanding how radiation interacts with materials so critical for building the next generation of reactors?
Well, it all comes down to the fact that nuclear is an extreme environment. And so materials degrade, and it's not just the usual corrosion, etc. type degradation that you see in everyday life. In a nuclear reactor, we're putting a material under extremes of temperature, pressure in the case of light water reactors, and radiation fields. So you've got a very high neutron flux, lots of gamma irradiation, and this degrades the materials. It puts them in a condition, or changes their condition, shall we say, as the reactor evolves and, as it generates power. And if you think about it, these reactors are now living for, we hope, 100 years, the current generation of reactors. And so those materials are going to have changed over that lifetime. And so it's important to be able to predict the way that they're going to behave. And I'll give you an example of this. So the light water reactors were originally designed with much shorter lifetimes, 40 years. But we did it very, very conservatively in terms of the way we designed them. And this was because we didn't understand the way that the materials behaved, which has actually turned out to be good for us, because now we know that those materials can survive for 100 years in these extreme environments, which means that essentially the generation of power from these reactors is very, very cheap, and we can keep on running them. Now, for the future, obviously, you want to design a reactor for a specific lifetime, etc. So if we understand the materials, we can actually do that much better now. The Fry Award was kind of an interesting thing because that was fundamental science and fundamental modeling and simulation of radiation effects. So it wasn't just an application to nuclear systems. It was across the board. In fact, actually, a lot of the work that I did at that stage was on biological systems and medical systems. So the knowledge base is transferable.
Yeah, that's I think something that a lot of us scientists see during our careers is moving from that fundamental science into applied science, and really kind of understanding how that all can be applicable to the public.
Yeah, it is. It's very important to realize that a lot of work done in universities and in national labs ultimately ends up having lots of different applications. And I must admit that the Fry Award is very dear to my heart because I got a nice big check with it. And it was just at the right time. My wife and my kids and I went and spent a month. It was awarded at a conference in Ireland. And we spent a month tracing the roots of my wife's family. She's Irish-American. And we bed and breakfasted around Ireland and got the opportunity to see all sorts of things that we probably wouldn't have done otherwise.
All right.
Very nice.
Yeah, that sounds like a great deal. All right. Well, you've talked a little bit about your role at Idaho National Lab, but talk a little bit more about what you're working on today.
Okay. So I'm the Chief Scientist for the Nuclear Science and Technology Directorate at INL. So I have a number of responsibilities within that particular role. But ultimately, I have delegated responsibility for the science and engineering that occurs within the directorate. This involves focusing our strategic initiatives and the work that we do there, overseeing all of the science that's actually done within the directorate. We don't just do conventional fission research. I'm also responsible for our university interactions. So the way that we are working with universities to accomplish our science and technology mission, but also our recruitment mission. Because a big part of the reason for working with universities is that we have to replace our workforce. We are looking to take the best and the brightest. I sometimes joke a little bit when I go to universities that I'm looking to steal their students, but it really is the heart of the matter. I am looking to recruit students. INL is an unusual beast when it comes to national labs. It's one of 3 that are applied science and engineering labs out of 17. And so our mission is very different from the Office of Science Labs. We are applied, we are mission driven in the sense that our focus is energy and critical infrastructure. And we aren't a PhD farm. We aren't a place that's full of PhDs. Only a small fraction of our staff are PhDs. Most of our staff are bachelor's and below level, and they're actually out there to accomplish a mission, to demonstrate reactors, to demonstrate new fuel types. We do the grunt work to make things like the natrium reactor that TerraPower is building in Wyoming a possibility. A lot of the underpinning science that's going into that reactor was performed at Idaho National Lab historically, and it is about development and demonstration. They talk about R and the 4 Ds. Research, development, demonstration, 3Ds, and deployment. We don't do deployment. Commercial industry does deployment, but the 2 Ds before that are a big part of what INL does. And to do that, we need a really competent and enthusiastic staff. And, that's why we interact so much with universities, is because we want to steal those bright sparks, enthuse them with our mission.
Right. Yeah, that workforce component is such a essential part to every conversation about nuclear and all energy sectors.
And sometimes you don't realize that. I first really became aware when I was at Manchester, actually, and the close interactions I had with the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, that how important a role that universities play in upskilling in certain fields. Mm-hmm. And, there's nobody else that can do that. And it's not just the bachelor's or the master's, or for that matter, PhDs. It's the certificate courses that are offered, etc., that get people on the road, that give them that base knowledge. I mean, we do a lot of in-house training, a lot of in-house development, actually, is the phrase that we use. But, you have to get people interested, and they have to have that basic understanding when they start to be interested.
Right, considering those workforce needs kind of across the board. Well, you mentioned decommissioning, so let's talk about that a little bit now. You've worked with the UK Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. What should we be thinking about today so that the plants built in the 2020s are easier and safer to decommission in the 2080s?
That's actually a really interesting question because, as you mentioned, I spent a lot of time working with the NDA in the UK. In fact, they paid half of my salary at the university. So, they're a big part of the reason that I went back to the UK after leaving Notre Dame. And it is a different paradigm, a different picture. The original nuclear plants were really not designed with decommissioning in mind and with making that an easy task. And it is so important because a large part of the economics, the cost of nuclear, is actually taking the things apart. It's building them and taking them apart afterwards. But it's also doing at least the latter part safely. And that is a lot easier if you've actually put some thought into what you're going to do initially. And it's not just actually the plant. It's the fuels as well, thinking about what you're going to do with the fuels and having them in the right form. We talk now about repurposing fuels, but really we've not done a great deal of that. It is a very open question about what we do with used nuclear fuel. And I use the phrase used nuclear fuel rather than spent nuclear fuel, which of course is the legal definition, because we only use a small fraction of the energy that's in that fuel. And so sometimes it's worth that thought to think, could we do the nuclear fuel better? And I think it is being thought about by the politicians at the moment, and certainly it is still being thought about by the research institutions like INL and like universities.
Mm-hmm. So you definitely have extensive experience in this area of radioactive waste management. What would you say is the biggest misconception that the public has about nuclear waste?
Nuclear waste is an interesting challenge. technically, we know what to do with used nuclear materials. It's something that we've spent a lot of time working on. The biggest challenge is actually public perception. And that reflects the fact that the nuclear industry and the national labs, and to a certain extent academia, have not done a very good job informing the public. My wife, she's retired now, but used to be in communications and advertising and marketing, and one of her big criticisms of me and my colleagues is the fact that we've never really spent the time to explain to the public, how safe the actual disposal techniques and technology are. You very often find a lot of misconceptions there. And I'll give you an example that's not US, because we're still formulating a plan about what to do in this country. When I was working with the NDA in the UK, the issue of a deep geological disposal facility came up, and they wanted to build this near the Sellafield site, which is in the western part of Cumbria. And obviously there are three components to approving this site. There is the local community, there is the Cumbrian County Council, or basically it's like the state, and then there is the UK government. The UK government wanted it, the local community wanted it, but the county of Cumbria voted against it. And a lot of this was misconception in the rest of Cumbria, rather than the local community, about the risks involved. And the reason that they have that misconception is because we've not really done a very good job of explaining and of publicising what we know and how safe things are. And so that is a failing, I think, on people like myself. We very often get into our little nerdy scientific or technical ballpark, and we don't think about the general population and actually trying to explain in terms that they can understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and the effects that it can have.
Yeah, agreed. Any thoughts on specifically how to get that word out to communities and talk with communities?
Well, if I actually knew the answer, I would probably be doing it. But my wife insists it is simply a fact that we don't take the time to communicate with the larger population. We talk to the major stakeholders, the energy companies, the politicians, etc., and a lot of them, as you've seen, the bipartisan support in this country for nuclear are getting the message, but we don't talk to local communities, and we need to do that more.
Yeah,
that is my experience both in the UK and here, and I think we're getting better at it. There is much more acceptance now about it, and the way to look at this is that messaging is important no matter what you do, and getting the right message out there and getting the facts out there rather than misconceptions. And that's the bottom line ultimately. I mean, there's always going to be NIMBYism, not in my backyard.
Right.
But we should be able to overcome that with information and facts.
Yes, getting that factual information out there. Well, let's talk a little bit about the future of nuclear. If you look back at the nuclear industry when you started and compare it to today, what makes you most optimistic about the role of nuclear energy in the global energy mix?
So I want to talk a little bit about the context, first of all.
Sure.
The CEGB first gave me a paycheck in 1980. And if you look at a graph showing nuclear energy put on the grid, 1980 was internationally, and I think in the US, the peak. And I watched, as my career progressed, that number go down steadily. In fact, actually quite rapidly. And now I see it going in the opposite direction. And for me, that makes it really, really exciting. Instead of decommissioning plants, which is, basically what I was doing a lot of the work for at the University of Manchester. The underpinning research there, the robotics to how to work for extreme environments, the effects of radiation, various different things. I'm now actually thinking about building reactors. And I get a buzz from that. I mean, don't get me wrong, the science that I've done for the whole of my life is interesting and exciting. But building something rather than tearing something down is a huge buzz. And, I can't say how much better I feel about the nuclear industry. And this is it's fairly recent. I mean, it's only the last 2 years of the Biden administration, we started tripling nuclear energy by 2050. Now we're quadrupling it, is the Trump administration's goal. And, we're really fully into it. I look at the executive orders that the administration has put out. 4 focused simply on growing the nuclear industry and growing the amount of energy that we put on the grid. And, there's another administrative order which we often forget about, which is gold standard science, which is the underpinning, the making sure that we're doing it properly. But it's all about enabling. We're in an environment at the moment from both the last administration and this administration that is really enabling nuclear power. It's providing all sorts of opportunities for deployment, for making it more economic, for making it more easy to build, and at the same time maintaining the safety record, which is, to be quite honest, second to none. If you look at the accidents that you've seen in nuclear, the Windscale accident in the UK, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl and Fukushima, there's only one where people have died from the actual nuclear accident. That's Chernobyl. The others, there's, Windscale, 3 Mile Island, there were essentially no fatalities due to the accident. And at Fukushima, it was due to the process of moving people afterwards, to the stress that was put on people. There's been no deaths due to radiation. Nuclear is safe, especially so when you can stop human errors. And a lot of the new advanced reactors are passively safe. It's not feasible to actually cause the challenges that we've had in the past.
Yeah. So you mentioned the new advanced reactors. So let's talk about that a little bit. And might get a little bit technical here, but much of your experience has been dedicated to conventional light water reactors, which utilize low enriched uranium, or LEU. So now we're seeing the introduction of these advanced reactors, many of which employ higher enrichment levels, high assay, low enriched uranium, or HALEU, novel fuel forms like trisoparticles and molten salts, or operate with a fast neutron spectrum. So how has the introduction of these advanced reactors presented new challenges and new opportunities?
First of all, there is another kind of conventional reactor. The UK, for instance, uses gas-cooled reactors. And that is one of the advanced reactor types that's being introduced in this country. But the use of HALEU allows smaller. So that's one of the reasons that we're interested in this. It enables small modular reactors. It enables micro reactors. The different fuel types also allow different temperature regimes, shall we say, for these reactors that allow high quality heat, which is not accessible from a light water reactor. Basically, a light water reactor operates at 320-ish degrees C, whereas some of these advanced reactors are at the twice that temperature. So you can get a lot more temperature differential, makes them more efficient, and also allows them to be used in other scenarios. So actually for processed heat or for high quality process heat rather than just for electrons. So it's no longer a case of simply putting electrons on the grid, but it's also allowing you to have industrial chemical processes, etc., to be used. The other thing, of course, is that SMRs and microreactors can be utilized in different scenarios from the large gigawatt scale reactors that we've used in the past. I mean, don't get me wrong. If we're going to put 400 gigawatts of nuclear power on the grid, the majority of that is going to come from the big AP1000 or EPR, depending on whether you're American or French type reactors. But, the niche utilization, so for remote communities, for distributed power, for military utilization close to the battlefield, are going to be things like microreactors. Small modular reactors also provide a huge number of different opportunities. As I said, they can be used for things other than electricity, but also it allows you to build a group of these things together, all operated from the same control system. But it means that, for instance, for data centers, you don't lose all of your power when the reactor goes down for refueling. Mm-hmm. It means you can cycle through the things and you don't have to worry about that. I mean, data centers, it's the big thing nowadays. And, is it behind the meter or in front of the meter? And if it's behind the meter, how do you power that thing if you take your reactor down, if it's a big one? The advanced reactors you don't need to do that because you have a series of small ones. You can just take one down at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a totally different paradigm that we're talking about now. And, I talk about these as advanced reactors, and advanced reactors specifically defined legally as a safer reactor. It's nothing to do with the different types of reactor there. And we are seeing passive safety being introduced into light water reactors as well. It's not just the advanced reactors. So it's technology advancing. I mean, all of the reactors that are on the grid at the moment producing electricity are using 60s and 70s style technology. We've done a lot from the 1970s until the 2020s, a lot of advancements in instrumentation and controls, in all sorts of things. So obviously we can build a lot different reactor nowadays that can do different things and perform in different ways.
Mm-hmm. And what about decommissioning? Can you talk a little bit about the differences in decommissioning between these advanced reactors and conventional reactors?
I forgot to mention one thing actually for the previous question. The advanced reactors do present us with some challenges. If you're operating at 300 degrees C, it's very different from operating at 700 degrees C. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of different material challenges that you experience in that kind of environment. And this could, of course, lead to different decommissioning challenges when when you're taking the reactors apart. Also, the fuel types are different. Mm-hmm. Triso is an inherently safe fuel. It's basically a speck of uranium oxide or oxycarbide inside a carbon and silicon carbide shell that's in a graphite matrix. Essentially, that's a one-through thing that you're going to put straight into a geological disposal facility, according to current thought. That doesn't mean we won't think of a way to reprocess it at the moment, because that uranium is very, very valuable. But the decommissioning of advanced reactors will be different. I mean, you mentioned molten salt reactors. That's a totally different fuel type. It is, we have the technology to pull the majority of the uranium and the poisons out of that, but you've still got the salt to dispose of. And pyroprocessing, of course, we've used that a lot for some of the metallic fuels that we have in our test reactors. In fact, actually, the HALEU that is now being allocated, a lot of that is coming from the test reactors that were on the INL site. They were high assay uranium, and it's being separated and it's being downblended to use in the demonstration units of the advanced reactors now. So we have a lot of technology out there to do this sort of thing. It's about actually deploying it.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about Wyoming specifically. Wyoming is traditionally a coal, oil, and gas state, now venturing into advanced nuclear. So based on your 40 years of experience, what does a successful integration of nuclear look like for a region's identity and our region's economy?
Well, I think, first of all, I should put a personal perspective on this. It's a bit like my pension plan. I don't think you put all of your money into one company. You diversify. And so I think that, adding nuclear to the energy mix can only be good for the local economy, simply because it's more diversification. Nuclear is a baseload energy source, or at least historically has been, like the hydrocarbon, the fossil fuels that you're talking about. So it fills that same sort of niche. It doesn't have the intermittency, shall we say, that the renewables, so solar and wind, have. And it fills a very similar role to oil and coal in particular, in the sense that it is a baseload. It goes on for, you want to run a reactor 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, etc. It doesn't ramp up rapidly like, say, a gas turbine. It is different fundamentally in terms of the things that it brings. It's a small footprint in at least the advanced reactors are going to be a much smaller footprint. And even the conventional reactors, the actual reactor itself is a small footprint. There's a safety zone around the reactor. I think that what's most important is that it provides an alternative. Societies are changing, and it's always a good idea to think about the future, to think about different things that are occurring. And there are other utilizations for many of the fossil materials. But at the moment, America is so short of energy that in reality, every electron that you put on that grid is important. So I really don't see it as competing with the fossil fuels. I see it as adding to them. and providing, opportunities for improving the economy in not just Wyoming, but in Idaho, in Utah, in Montana, etc. Nuclear has traditionally been California and the eastern side of the country. And to me, it's just brilliant that it's now coming into the middle, to the Mountain West and other areas, providing that energy security, that energy abundance that, to be quite frank, we need to grow America.
Yeah, really appreciate those insights. So, Simon, let's move on to talk about your advisory capacity here at the University of Wyoming. So, you were recently appointed to the Advisory Committee for SER's Nuclear Energy Research Center, or NERC. And for our listeners that are not familiar with that program, it's a faculty-led center of excellence co-directed by SER Professor of Law Tara Righetti and Associate Professor of Chemistry Caleb Hill. The mission of NERC has been to build interdisciplinary nuclear energy capacity across the UW campus, and some really exciting opportunities have come out of those efforts, including some transformative grants, as well as the launch of the Nuclear Energy Science Certificates. Helping to guide these efforts is the Industry Academic Advisory Committee, which has been instrumental in helping NERC identify areas of greatest potential for our students here at the University of Wyoming. So, Simon, as the newest addition to the Advisory Committee for the Nuclear Energy Research Center, what was it about the center's mission that compelled you to join?
Okay, so first of all, I want to say that I'm not being totally altruistic in being part of this committee. As I would probably best phrase it, I want to steal the students. INL is a major player when it comes to nuclear. The majority of our staff are from the Mountain West region. And so I'm interested in producing good quality, educated staff that we can steal.
Right.
But actually, it's bigger than that. I mentioned earlier on about communication and about the challenges that we've had. So one of the most important things that I think for people like me at the moment is to try and spread the word. And I think part of trying to spread the word is being involved in efforts like this to grow from the ground up competencies and interest in nuclear. I see this particular effort as being so important in the state of Wyoming in terms of preparing the workforce for the future, in terms of spreading the word to the local Wyoming community, but also in terms of developing a research infrastructure for nuclear, which is not based on the traditional universities. INL is in Idaho. So the local university system has to be our feeder in terms of for collaborative research, in terms of our staff that are going to come and work for us, as I've emphasized before. We can't just think about the West Coast universities or the East Coast universities. We have to think about growing capability, intellectual capability, so faculty, students, programs closer to home. Mm-hmm. And, I see this role as being a very good way of influencing that and making sure it happens, to be quite honest. I will be disappointed if I can't have a positive effect at INL through this, to be honest, self-interest. But I also hope that we can have an effect on the institution as a whole. Part of this is because, you mentioned the associate professor that is working in the chemistry department. That's my background. To me, I can see all sorts of opportunities there. And I've got to declare personal interest here. I was actually part of the committee that provided some of the funding to Professor Hill, I think it is, mm-hmm. when he was setting the centre up from DOE. He probably doesn't know that, and I probably shouldn't be saying that, but I was the National Technical Director Advisor for that committee. It's, so I have self-interest in this, in seeing it succeed as well. And it is actually a unique aspect to the way that a lot of universities are actually building their nuclear programs at the moment. The concentration on radiochemistry and that side of things, the fuel cycle side, is somewhat different. And it does tie into something else that's very important here at Wyoming, which is critical materials and minerals. a lot of the same technology, a lot of the same separation science. It's a very natural overlap, a very natural synergy that's being developed there. And all I can say is kudos. I don't know who made the decision, but I think it was a good one.
Yes, definitely lots of overlap and opportunities for collaboration in the nuclear space and the critical minerals space. And the critical minerals space is something that's dear to my heart as well. So, Simon, where do you see the greatest opportunities for students in the nuclear field?
Two areas, really, at least initially. The fact that Wyoming is going nuclear in terms of power provides lots of opportunities in terms of the actual industrial side, so the commercial generation side. A nuclear plant require qualified individuals. If you actually look at the breakdown of the staff required for different types of power, nuclear requires a trained workforce, a little bit more than, say, for instance, a coal station or a gas station. So university students, people with certificates level education in nuclear, there's lots of job opportunities locally for that. But I also see it as being something bigger, because nuclear is historically an area where there's been a lot of research and technology development. One of the painful things about being at INL is we keep losing all of our staff to startup companies and to developers. And the fact that they are stealing our staff means that there is a lot of opportunities there for students that are coming out of universities, whether that's to come to places like INL for a period of time and then moving into industry, or whether it's going straight into the supply chain side of it, because it's not just the developers of the reactors, it's fuel developers. Everybody seems to be wanting staff at the moment, so lots of employment opportunities. I should also add that it's not just that side. There's lots of opportunities for research collaboration with places like INL. INL works across the critical minerals and the nuclear fuel cycle. In fact, the three strategic initiatives at INL are a nuclear, so enabling energy dominance. And then the next one is critical minerals and infrastructure. And then the final one is to do with cyber and the security side of things. So two of the three initiatives at INL have focused very much on the challenges that the University of Wyoming is addressing through its faculty, through its education programs, etc. And so that provides us with two links. I mean, there's the obvious link that I've talked about a lot, which is a well-educated workforce and the opportunities there, but also there's the opportunities for collaboration in terms of science. As we develop advanced reactors, as we develop new fuel cycles or advanced fuel cycles, as we develop new fuels and new structural materials, which I mentioned earlier on, we need that academic input. We need those new ideas. As I mentioned before, we're an applied science lab, so a lot of the stuff that we do is development and demonstration. That there's the big R in front of them, which is something that the universities and University of Wyoming, one would hope, would be a part of that supply chain. In a different sense from the usual supply chain.
Right.
Intellectual supply chain.
Right. So yeah, those regional collaborations are just so important, and you've touched on a lot of this, but anything else that you would like to add about opportunities for collaboration between the University of Wyoming and Idaho National Lab?
Well, first of all, we welcome it. We look forward to it. We want to do it. It's a big part of our regional engagement strategy. It's a big part of spreading the nuclear message. If there are any faculty here that want to see INL, want to visit, want to talk about collaborations, it's simon.pimblott@inl.gov. One of my major responsibilities is university relationships and the nuclear science and technology side, so give me a buzz. I like to say, both to our staff and to everybody else, my door is always open, and it usually is, actually. I can't abide being in a locked room. Afraid of confined spaces, I guess. But yes, I would love to talk to anybody that has any interest. Can't guarantee that we'll find the niche, but I'm always looking for people to collaborate with, or for our staff to collaborate with. And you never know what might happen.
Yep, very good. Well, we're very much looking forward to integrating your expertise into our nuclear endeavors here, and hopefully looking forward to many return visits from you. We like to end our podcast with a Wyoming-related question. So, Simon, what has been your favorite thing about visiting Wyoming?
To be perfectly honest, the thing that I like most about Wyoming is looking outside the window and the views that you get. And, you know, and this is very personal. I grew up in a city. I spent a lot of time in Chicago, a lot of time in Manchester, and I actually like the sparsity of population. It's just good to be able to walk and not see people. So Wyoming, well, the whole of the Mountain West is just heaven for me in terms of the outdoors, shall we say. But, you know, I don't want to take away. I mean, the reason that I'm here is about the university and is about nuclear and that sort of thing. So, you know, to me, that is also important. The fact that nuclear is growing, we have a nuclear vision for the future, and the University of Wyoming is part of that vision, and I hope shares our vision.
All right. Well, excellent. Thanks again so much for being with us today, Simon. And to our listeners, if you want to learn more about the work being done at the School of Energy Resources Nuclear Energy Research Center, visit SER's website. And as always, thank you for joining us on Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape, the podcast that highlights the School of Energy Resources at the University of Wyoming. You can expect a new episode of Energy Frontier every other Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. See you next time.